Wow, what a great view from here. You should come up and see this. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Stern, and I've had the privilege of being Weizmann Canada's CEO for over 12 years. Tonight's event is a dream come true for me. I'm so grateful to be surrounded by an amazing group of volunteers. Look at the goosebumps, really? Visionary donors, an incredible team. Where's my team? Where's my team? I'll introduce you to them later. They're all, look at that. And I get to hang out with rock stars like Ron and Avi. When I read Heather's book, I thought, how amazing would it be if Heather would be part of this event, part of this conversation, and she agreed. And then I twisted Laurence's arm to moderate, because as you'll hear later on in the program, part of the original family visionary donors supporting research in this area. So it's a dream come true. Thank you all for being here, for Mission Imperative, and for being part of the solution. Over the next hour or so, we'll gain new insights into the climate crisis and what each of us can do to help turn the tide and make the next 10 years count. The Weizmann Institute began its sustainability efforts back in the 1980s, led by visionary donors from Toronto, not mentioning any families in particular, with the launch of solar research in the Canadian Institute for Energies and Applied Research. The vital work of our scientists continues today through their efforts to make our campus more sustainable and with the launch of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability. And that's why we're all here. The Mission Imperative Tour is a 4-city tour across Canada this week with a different focus each day. Last night in Montreal, our focus was food. Today's discussion will focus on environmental sustainability and the choices we make. In just the last 200 years, the human population has grown exponentially from over 1 billion to more than 8 billion today. Scientific advancements are behind so many of our successes as a growing population, but they've also contributed to the environmental crisis. The climate crisis is so daunting that some of us may feel powerless, but there is strength in numbers, and tonight we'll discuss how we can be part of the solution. You're in for a fascinating conversation. For those of you who are new to the Weizmann family, welcome. Allow me to share with you what makes Weizmann special for me and for many people around the world. The Institute has an over 70-year history at the forefront of scientific discoveries, and since 1964, Weizmann Canada has been helping support these critical discoveries. The magnificent Weizmann campus is characterized by the joy and pursuit of science. Part of Weizmann's reputation is built by challenging current thinking with curiosity-driven research, which has led to life-changing breakthroughs. This year, Weizmann ranked once again 8th in the world for research quality in the prestigious Leiden University ranking, the only institute outside the US to make the top 8 list among the likes of Harvard, Princeton, and MIT. One thing the pandemic has taught us is that science is the key to a better tomorrow for all humanity. Weizmann research transcends borders and reaches us in Canada each and every day. In addition to the treatments and technologies we take for granted which stem from research at Weizmann, last year alone, Weizmann co-published studies with more than 30 Canadian institutions on topics ranging from environment to therapeutic discoveries. Encouraging dialogue and collaboration to promote new discoveries is what Weizmann is all about, which is why we're so pleased to welcome you all here today. Before we begin, I'd like to sincerely thank our event sponsors, Wealth Stewart, Nutrien, Jaroslawski Fraser, Raymond James and Rempart Asset Management, the RBC Foundation on behalf of Marita Symbolizon Wealth Management, the Stephen Schiller family, and Andrea Yampolsky of AY Talent. And I see all these youngsters busy posting on social media, so please use the hashtag Mission Imperative if you're posting. In a moment, Dr. Laurence Rubin, Professor of Medicine at University of Toronto, Weizmann Canada board member, and Weizmann Institute Sustainability and Energy Research Initiative board member, will join us on stage as moderator for today's panel discussion. I did want to mention that Heather Reisman will be joining us virtually due to her very busy travel schedule. We're, of course, excited to be joined by Heather, a cherished member of the Weizmann family and one of the newest inductees of Canada's Walk of Fame. Heather also happens to be an inspiring role model for me and so many others. As Canada's best-known book lover and chief book lover at Indigo, Heather's recognized for Heather's picks, her book recommendations. So rather than read off our panelists' illustrious bios, which you all received in your email, we asked each panelist to provide their own version of Heather's picks to help introduce them. So let's begin with Laurence's. H2O, A Biography of Water by Philip Ball, The Insect Crisis by Oliver Millman, and The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. I'd like to hear more about those. During this panel discussion, you'll continue to hear about the Weizmann Institute's newly launched Institute for Environmental Sustainability. So please direct your attention to the screen for a short video introduction.
I love this place. Believe it or not, only 120,000 years ago, the Dead Sea level was even lower than what it is today. We study what happened back then to predict what will happen due to global warming.
Today's state-of-the-art solar technology only works well in specific locations, like here, in the desert. Our future lies in designing intelligent materials that capture sunlight anytime, anywhere.
Clouds are one of the most important components of the climate system. They control the amount of energy that reaches the surface. So the question is, how will climate change affect them?
Our lab is studying microbes in their natural habitats to see how we can work with them to alleviate human impact on the environment.
By understanding when and where plants flower, we can greatly improve present-day crops and also introduce new ones that would better cope with a rapidly changing environment.
Did you know that it takes about 2,700 liters of water to dye one single cotton t-shirt? We are developing cotton in different colors, which would save a huge amounts of water and would create green new sustainable materials, or red, or blue, or yellow.
Israel is a country with abundant sunshine. We are researching intelligent materials that are not only better at harnessing this energy, but can even self-heal.
Plants and forests absorb huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. In our research, we're asking, how can we enhance their ability to slow down global warming?
Every second breath we take is created by algal blooms in the ocean. It's therefore vital to understand how this ecosystem functions.
Corn, rice, soybean, and this wheat are the 4 major crops that feed humanity. Improving their yield and nutritional value in a sustainable manner will benefit all of us.
Understanding how microorganisms influence our oceans now and in the past will give us insight into what will happen under climate change. This is critical information for ocean stewardship.
Good evening. It's hard to top that. Thank you, Susan. Like Susan, I'm incredibly pleased to be here today with all of you. And it's important to me for the following reason. The journey to here began almost 4 decades ago, when the Canadian Society of the Weizmann Institute, led by my father-in-law Tom Beck and his wife Mary, undertook to fund, with a host of other Canadians, the Canadian Institute for Energies and Applied Research, which we knew as the Solar Tower Program. My first visit to Rehovot, even though I've been to Israel many times, my first visit to Rehovot, however, was in 1988 at the dedication of that project. And I was just showing Ron and Avi some pictures that I have of us there. And much has changed, which is good. Over the years, I became more involved, ultimately representing Tom on the program committee from Alternative Energy, which was called AERI, and then a few years ago, we renamed it as SERI, or Sustainability and Alternative Energy. The latter, a key addition to solidify our role across the spectrum of sustainability research and beyond. During these last several years, under the very able and critically important leadership of Ron Milo, and with the support of Avi, who you'll hear both from shortly, we've expanded across the campus to almost 60 different research groups. It started off as a small research granting program, and now it's campus-wide. And now we have achieved what we designate as flagship status at the Institute, which is a major programmatic initiative. Well, the goals of the original program at the time, if you remember in the 80s, no one was thinking about solar research, were incredibly challenging and quite radical. It gives me great satisfaction that we have arrived at this pivotal juncture, and even a greater desire to see this next and arguably most important chapter of the programmatic initiative. And that is why I am here today. So before we get to the panel, just a few housekeeping points. First of all, can we turn our cell phones on mute, which I forgot to do myself. Secondly, the event is being recorded today and will be made available to all of you through the website. And we will begin with a 5-minute talk from each of our panelists explaining their work, followed by a moderated Q&A session. We will then open it up to audience questions around 6:45, so last quarter hour. During the audience Q&A, there will be roving microphones for you to ask, and if you have any questions, please get the attention of one of the Weizmann staffers in the audience. And if you want to, there are QR codes available around the room that you can scan, and you can submit your question that way. We'll come back to those questions at the end during the audience Q&A. And before all you leave later this evening, we have a special surprise for everyone, so be sure to stick around and find out what it is. And now for our distinguished panelists. To my right, that's right, is Professor Ron Milo, who I've known for a number of years and who I approached at the Weizmann. There's a cafe that everybody gathers at, and it's called Café Mada. And we were struggling at that time to find leadership for this. And I saw Ron sitting there. I don't know if you remember that. And I just walked up to him and I said, "Hi, I'm Laurence Rubin, Kathy Beck, my wife, and how would you like to be involved in this?" And he said, "Absolutely." So he is he's the Dean of Education, among many of his roles. He's in the Department of Plant and Environmental Sciences, even though he's a physicist, right? And he's the co-leader of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability at the Weizmann Institute. As was done earlier for me, rather than read Ron's bio, which is too lengthy, here are Ron's picks of great books. Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed by Jared Diamond. Factfulness: 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think by Hans Rosling. This is an important thing to think about in all this despair that we have these days. And Epic Measures: 1 Doctor, 7 Billion Patients by Jeremy Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Ron Milo.
So, hello everyone. As we were gathering and I had some conversation with some of the people, here in the third row, I was asked about what subject is it important to learn in order to deal with the challenges of the future and of sustainability. And something clicked for me, because I was answering that I think the most important is to be able to learn new subjects by yourself, and to teach yourself things. And I tried to wonder to myself, okay, what made a difference for me in that? And it turned, and I understood that really maybe the most important event for me was during elementary school. We were given the task of, throughout the year, we would go to the library, and we had time that instead of going just and hearing the teacher, you could choose a subject that you want to study, and you had to write in the end like a, like a thick project about it. And you know what the subject that I chose? It just occurred to me now. It was about Canada. I don't recall exactly why. I think maybe it's because I have some family that I met also yesterday in Montreal. And I think I always, because of this, I love geography, so I would look at the, at the atlas, and, Canada has this very prominent place there. But it was all about, so that's the first project I did in my life. Studying a whole year about Canada and summarizing that. And I think that was like the development of my capabilities to learn new things, which I need to practice all the time, because what started as, for example, the Sustainability and the Energy Research Initiative, and now is turning into a flagship. In this flagship, we have more than one subject, because the subject of dealing with the challenges of sustainability is very multifaceted. So we understood that in this institute, we want to have the fields where there's the most expertise already at Weizmann, or very strong international groups. So the subjects are green materials, renewable energies, food security, pollution, climate and health, marine research, global climate changes, and biodiversity. So you probably understand that I have to learn new stuff all the time. So it's a very useful thing. In terms of like my personal lab, just to give two examples of how that translates in what we do in the labs. So in one project that we started roughly at the time I arrived at Weizmann, so that's like 14 years ago, we're teaching bacteria, specifically a gut bacteria that scientists love to study called E. coli. It's like the pet of molecular biologists. And we want to change its diet. Yesterday we were talking about food, so the diet of this bacteria is eating sugar, like most bacteria, and kind of like us in a way, and releasing carbon dioxide, like we all do, and all animals. So we decided, in a crazy thought, if you like, by two very talented graduate students that arrived at the lab, they were asking, can we change the diet such that instead it would eat carbon dioxide and build all sorts of useful things like, sugars for feed or renewable fuels or stuff like that. And we've been after that for the past decade, and we have very interesting milestones that actually now we changed its diet, and now we're trying to see how we could make it economical so it could be used, for example, when you want to capture carbon dioxide next to tailpipes or directly from the air, which is a very big challenge these days. So this is one main effort in the lab and the subject of interest to us. And at the same time, I love to understand the world using numbers. Numbers is so I feel like it's like my sixth sense in order to get a deeper understanding of what's happening. Maybe it's my background in physics that make me think this way. And so we were after the question of getting a quantitative view of the biosphere. Trying to understand, for example, what weighs more. Is it all bacteria, or all plants, all animals, or all fungi? And doing like a census of life on Earth from all the available literature. And surprisingly, it turns out it hasn't been done before. So we've been developing all the tools and mathematical approaches in order to be able to do that. And when we did that, and people along the way were asking, is it interesting or not? We were curious. So when you're curious, you're allowed to do it at the Weizmann Institute. That's our mandate. We published that, and it had a lot of international attention. And, actually, my mother, which is now 80, just took my daughter, her granddaughter, to London for her bat mitzvah. And they went to the Natural History Museum. And then they sent me a picture of my mother, my daughter, next to an exhibition they now have at the Natural History Museum in London, where they're citing our work. They made this nice visualization of the results on the biomass on Earth. And it's mostly interesting because it also gives you a view of the impacts of us, humanity, on this biomass. For example, once we had this census of life on Earth, we could now look at what and you could compare it to things related to humans. For example, you could look at all the mass of all the mammals, wild mammals, kind of like what I read to my young daughter about, the zebra meeting the lion, and then they went to talk with the elephant and things, or the fox. And you can compare it to all the mass of all the domesticated mammals. And you can try and see, okay, what do we have more these days? It turns out, as we show in the study, that there is currently 30 times more mass of domesticated mammals than all the wild mammals combined. All the elephants with all the deers and all the foxes and all the bisons and caribou is just 3% in comparison to, so if, when I'm telling her the story, and I want to be a good scientist and stick to the facts, I should tell her a story about a cow that met another cow. They went to a cow party. There's been, the bouncer was a pig. And so that's one example. Another example, we were looking at comparing the mass of all living things on Earth, which is kind of like constant roughly, to the mass of all human-made stuff, human-made things. It's called anthropomass, made by anthropos, by humans. And this, as you can imagine and look around, it's rapidly rising. I'm talking about, the cell phones, the cars, also the buildings, the roads. So I was taught when I studied math that when you have something that's relatively constant and then there's something that's rapidly rising, at some point, the two graphs are supposed to intersect. Meaning at some point on Earth, we'll have more human-made stuff than all the living things combined in terms of mass. So we asked ourselves, when would that happen? It took 2 years to get the answer. And what we got is that the year is 2020. So we're really living in a historical moment where one species on Earth has created so much stuff to be equal in mass to all the living things around us. And I think it's part of, I think it's an important realization to know that. It's not that that brings you a solution or that necessarily is a problem. I think it's more of like a realization or something important to know that if people think, we were just one small species, the Earth is huge, we can't have any effect. I think this shows in a rigorous manner that we have a significant role on Earth, and I think with that comes responsibility. And for me, that's one of the motivations of continuing the research we're doing at Weizmann and putting more emphasis and more effort around the Environmental Sustainability Institute that now combines the work of so many research groups, so much talent, but there's need for more talent and there's more challenges to deal with. Maybe I'll start with that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Avi Levy, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Biochemistry, Department of Plant and Environmental Sciences, and co-leader of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability at Weizmann, along with Ron. And here are Avi's picks of great books he recommends, and why. The End of Plenty, The Race to Feed a Crowded World by Joel Byrne. The World Was My Garden, Travels of a Plant Explorer by David Fairchild, and The Invention of Nature, Alexander von Humboldt's New World by Andrea Wolf. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Levy.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Avi Levy. I was born in Paris, and I migrated to Israel when I was 17 years old. And born in Paris, I was meant to become a doctor by my mother, but somehow it didn't work. And one of the reasons it didn't work, there are several reasons, but one of them is that she was a role model also for me, and I looked at her, and she was feeding the world, She was cooking and feeding us, and she was feeding the neighbors and all the old ladies in the building and so on. So I felt that, it's something important to feed the world. And at the same period, there was really starvation in the world. People were dying in India, in Biafra, in many places from hunger. And I remember seeing her, looking at the TV and crying. And I think this was imprinted in my mind that this is something that should never happen. And Science did a lot, accomplished a lot. Today there is a very little amount of people who die by starvation. There is lots of malnutrition in this world, but not much starvation. But it's not something we can take for granted. I mean, we see now what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and there was a drought in Canada, who is one of the big wheat producers in the world. So food security becomes again an issue. Now, what is food security? Food security is bringing food to everyone on the globe, on the earth, in sufficient amount and also in good quality. And why is this such a big challenge? Why are we facing an era where we really have to find new ways to produce food? And one of the reasons is that there is an increasing number of human beings. We are 8 and we are going on the way to 10 by 2050 so that's one reason, feeding more people. The other reason is climate change. It's very hard to grow plant when it's warmer and there is more drought and there are more extreme events on the planet, so this is a huge challenge. Also, we have less arable land because of urbanization, and we cannot cut all the forests to grow more field because that's not an option. That would make bigger damage than benefit. So we have facing a huge challenge, making more food for people. And this is one of the things which stimulated me to study wheat. Wheat is the basic of Western food, let's say. It provides a huge amount of the calories that we take. In some countries like Egypt and Turkey, it's up to 40% of their diet. Here, something around 10%, I would bet. So it depends on the countries, but it's a huge component. It's one of the 3 big crops. Maize is maybe producing almost 1 billion ton a year of grain, but it's mostly for animals. Wheat is mostly for human, and it's 770 tons a year. This year, the yield will go down. So, and rice is for Asia. So, but mostly for Asia. So we are facing this huge challenge. Now, how do we deal with this? So I'm a geneticist. One of the things which fascinates me in nature is all the diversity. We heard about biodiversity, one of the items that we want to study. How do all the species evolve? How do different forms in nature come about? And this is by the process of evolution, natural mutations, and selection. Now, this made me so curious. I really wanted to understand what's going on, and I focused on the question of mutation. So mutation is damage in the DNA which is not repaired properly. If it's repaired precisely, there is no mutation. If the repair is error-prone or incorrect, you get the mutations. Now, there are different types of mutations, different mechanisms of repair, and this is really one of the things which I've been interested in to understand, and this is what contributes to biodiversity in this world. And being in Israel and being fascinated by wheat, we are in a very unique location to study biodiversity of wheat, because Israel is one of the countries where wheat domestication started and the wild wheat are growing. So wild wheat are growing in the Fertile Crescent, but the genome of wheat was sequenced recently, and we know that some of the major mutations which enabled domestication of wheat started in what's called the South Levant, somewhere between Israel and Syria, in the Hermon region. So, and this is shown both by archaeology and by genetics. So it's a fascinating opportunity to study wheat, and I studied it in my PhD. I studied the wild wheat, the ancestor of wheat, what we call the mother of wheat. And this is a very interesting species. Why? Because in nature, it faces lots of challenges. Throughout hundreds of thousands of years, it's been facing climate change. There were periods of heat, periods of glaciation. It's been facing all kinds of disease. It's been adapted to different types of climates. So it's really a source of genes for resilience to the climate. So we can study this wild wheat. And I've been studying wild wheat since my PhD. When was that? I forgot. From 82 to 87, 98. And And my students still are studying it now, so we have really a long continuation where we can analyze the structure of population and their properties and how they evolve under climate change. And one of the things which we started in our PhD related to food security was things that my mentor had found that wild wheat are rich in protein. And part of my work was to map these genes, and we mapped them on chromosome 6, whatever. And this genetic material has been used by breeders. And today, I don't know if you know, maybe you guys are proud of that. You should be proud. Yes. Canadian wheat is the richest in protein in the world. It's up to, the Manitoba wheat is famous for its 16% protein compared to 12 or 13% in the regular wheat. And part of this is due to genes which came from this wild species in Israel, which we mapped many years ago. The genes were cloned by scientists from UC Davis. We used this material, but that was the beginning of something, and eventually it contributed to something of food security. So this is the story of wheat, and I told you that I'm interested in the mutations, and learning from nature, we developed new technology to modify genomes in a very precise manner. And so these techniques are based on what's called gene editing. If some of you heard about the CRISPR-Cas revolution, it's a new revolution in biology. You can target mutations to very specific region. You can replace genes. You can make very accurate change. And we can reshuffle chromosome segments also in a precise manner. So we can today rewrite the genome, redefine the genome, the chromosomes. And this is a new revolution also, which will enable us really to make the next green revolution to be able to improve wheat and crops in general. And one of the things we're interested is to, and we are doing, is to use these techniques to transfer genes which can confer resilience to from wild wheat to modern wheat. So this is why it's important to study biodiversity, to conserve it, and to use it. So this is one example. The other thing is when we develop this technology, because really that's my expertise, that's the genetics, another aspect of dealing with climate change, which is what I just told you on wheat, is how to adapt to the change. But another way is really how to avoid this, how to find solutions which are independent of climate. And one of the things we are working on is what's called vertical farming. It's a new revolution also in biology. It's the ability to grow plant in a completely controlled environment where the conditions are isolated from what's going on outside, from the change in the temperature. So in a way, you can grow plants in a totally optimal manner. Now, this revolution is important for many reasons. One of the reasons is that, well, what I just said, that you can grow plant with, regardless of if you're in Saudi or in Canada or whatever, regardless of the environment, you can have them every day here. You can grow near urban area, so you save on the carbon footprint that is due to the transport of the produce. You save a lot on water. It consumes about 10% than growing in the field because of evaporation and draining into the aquifer. And you save on fertilizer. And if you grow in a semi-sterile or clean environment, you don't need to spray again. You don't need insecticides, pesticides, and so on, so you can get a clean product. It's been enabled by the LED revolution, which made the ability to grow plant with less input of energy. And what we are doing as geneticists is to adapt plant to this environment. So we make plants which are miniature, which have a very rapid cycle. You can grow several generations in 1 year. And now one of the new things we are doing is trying to find the genes which enable the plant to grow under lower light, so to use less energy input. So recently we cloned genes which enables to do bonsai plants, to miniaturize them. And this way we can adapt now new crops to vertical farming. Vertical farming is used today mostly for leafy greens, leafy vegetables, lettuce and so on. We want now to do it for tomatoes. We developed these miniature tomatoes. We want to use it for cucumbers, for all kinds of vegetables that could be grown now in this new environment. So this is a new green revolution, a new way to grow crops and to think, to use what we learned from genetics, from science, from plant genomes. There is a huge knowledge that we can harness for that on the different metabolic pathways to make better produce, on the resistance to disease, on the response of plant to light and so on. So all this new knowledge which we've accumulated in recent years now, we can use, and together with precise genetic modification to enable this new green revolution. So that's it.
Something to look forward to. I was showing Ron and Avi, I got an email from our hospital today talking about a program putting up by the family medicine program called plant-based diets and having seminars. So these sort of things are happening all the time, and they're ubiquitous. Now, it was a great pleasure to welcome Heather Reisman online, and it's really great to have you here. Thank you very much.
We don't hear her.
Can you hear me?
We don't hear her. She's on mute.
She's on mute.
Hi.
No.
No.
We don't hear you.
I'm not on mute. I don't know if there's something with the technology.
We hear you.
We hear you now.
We hear you now.
We hear you well.
Okay.
Well, you're a long way away, and very happy to have you here. Thank you very much. Heather's picks, which everybody knows about, but for this particular session, are 3 books. One of them was called Think Again by Adam Grant, The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, and Heather said, any book by Neil Gaiman, but a good start is The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I'm going to sort of look that up. Anyways, please welcome Heather Reisman.
Laurence, what do you prefer, actually? Laurence?
Lawrence.
Laurence, okay, terrific. Thank you very much. When Susan first asked if I would be on this panel, my first reaction was, I can't be on a panel with 2 scientists. This will be far too difficult. And probably everyone in the audience is wondering, what am I doing up here with these 2 scientists? And I can only say 2 things. My experience with Weizmann in the last 12 or 13 years, since Jerry and I have had a deep involvement, that somehow Weizmann has this incredible ability to do extraordinary, world-changing things, and yet create these wonderful bonds with everyday people, and you actually can feel a connection with the science and the scientists in a way that I find quite astounding. We've had the privilege over the last number of years to meet many people at Weizmann, and each and every encounter, I'm struck by that, by the openness and the legitimate comfort and interest in connecting people who are on the donor side with the real work that's been going on. And so, I've had a lot of great experiences. And so when Susan asked me, I said, of course, I could never say no to Susan. And I suspect the other reason is that I did write a handbook. I co-wrote a handbook. It's called Imagine It, A Handbook for a Happier Planet. And that book grew out of my own journey to understand what is happening with the planet and what can somebody who really is not connected to the deep science, how can I as an individual, how can we as individuals do our part while the scientists are doing their significant parts? And I had the benefit that a very close friend of mine and my co-producer in making documentaries has been involved in the environmental movement on the lay side since the day that Al Gore decided to do his movie. They are very close friends. She had connected me with him and with the work. And so over the course of the last many years, I have been on my own journey to learn and explore and understand what I can do. And a couple of years ago, she and I were out for a walk, and she was, as always, her name is Lori David, and she was, as always, complaining about the fact that we're not moving fast enough, our governments aren't moving fast enough, people aren't moving fast enough, we are not actually taking on board how serious this problem is and how we simply have to change what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, what we consume, how much we throw away, how much plastic we're using. And she was on this rant about how we're all doing such a bad job. And I said, well, you know, Laura, you've been in it for so long that you forget that for most of us, it can be overwhelming. Like, it can be overwhelming. I have the benefit of you these last 10 or 15 years as my guide, but the issue of what we as individuals can do can be overwhelming. And the news just pours over us. And it's hard. And I said, well, as a person who loves books, why don't we try and write a book, a handbook, something that could bring the big ideas into approachable, easy to absorb understanding of how are we in our everyday actions, how are we actually doing things generally unintentionally, that things which are creating damage and which are adding up to all that stuff, Ron, that you talked about, all this stuff. And maybe if we could make it easy for people to understand, then we can make our little contribution. And so the result of that is Imagine It, a handbook for a happier planet, which I think everyone will get a copy of on the way out. And I would say if we are
You revealed the surprise.
Oh, no, I ruined the surprise. Okay. Well, I would suspect if we're going to approach reading the research being done at Weizmann, this might be a good first step. And so it's those two reasons that I've been invited to be here, that I have such a beautifully deep respect for any opportunity to interact with Weizmann, and because I did create this handbook. And now, lo and behold, it's turned out to be a bestseller here in Canada, which I guess I have a little bit of opportunity to support, but it is also doing really well in the US, so quite happy about that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, continuing on your theme, Heather, that you alluded to, and I think you said it so beautifully about why you find Weizmann such an incredible place, a place that you can engage in with no pretense or whatever, and meet people and do things. I thought this was a good time to sort of say, because let's face it, this whole area is very much a global problem and a global approach. There are a tremendous number of activities going on in sustainable research, in climate control, in carbon capture, anything you want to mention. As I just told you, my own hospital is sponsoring programs on how to eat better. I mean, these are everyday things. On one hand, our society sees these as somewhat unapproachable because of the scale is so vast. It's so vast that you can't sort of figure out like what I can do. And I think Heather's book gives you a pathway forward there, a handbook to do that. On the other hand, everybody wants to have that answer. So the question then is, I would ask our panelists, why Weizmann? Why is Weizmann specifically positioned as good or better than most to address these issues? So I would open that question up to you. Ron?
So I'd say, first of all, there's definitely a need to, have talent from all around the world, approaching the problem. But at Weizmann, we have this, the DNA of the Institute is all about freedom to explore questions of basic research just because you're curious about them. And if you're curious about that, and they took care to choose which people they want to lead research, they give them the absolute freedom to go about it. And then interesting things happen, because that almost by definition leads you to places you can go and explore niches or areas where there's questions that you're curious about that have not been explored so much before. And this basic research often leads to new insights. And new insight is what you need in order to find transformative solutions. Because for the solutions that for immediate problems that are kind of like clear, that's something that everybody are already working on. But when you're working on something completely different that you got into a new field, then you can find things that would lead you also to very different solutions. And this is also very much facilitated at Weizmann by the fact that you really have access to fantastic infrastructure, excellent students, the capability to really optimize under optimal conditions, explore the things you want to do. For example, in what I told you before, let's say starting from the question of, can we teach bacteria to change their diet? It was all coming as a result of having these two fantastic PhD students that came, and one was had this fantastic mental capacity to know all the different enzymes. Enzymes are like these small machines that we have in our body that know how to turn, usually there was the aim of alchemy in order to, make gold out of, copper or whatever it was. So actually, biology has this kind of magical thing. It's just called biochemistry, and the things that do these transformations are enzymes. And he was the best student in his year at the Technion in Israel, knowing all of those enzymes in his head. At the same time, another fantastic student was coming from the Israeli intelligence, and he was like this computer Jedi that could basically teach the computer to solve any problem. And when they came together to the lab, the computer scientist learned from the biochemist how to take all of those machines and teach the computer how to find all the possible combinations in order to be able to deal with the problem of taking carbon dioxide from the air and make useful things. That kind of combination did not happen anywhere in the world. Somehow it happened on the Weizmann campus. I think it's related to this combination of things. And finally, the Weizmann Institute is in Israel, and we have this very strong tendency to try and work in a very agile manner. Maybe it's because it's a young country, maybe because there's lots of stuff happening all the time, but there's entrepreneurship is what all my friends who are not in academia, they have their startups in all of different subjects. I'm the kind of the black sheep among all my friends in terms of how much money I make. That aside, it means that anything that we're doing at Weizmann that has a potential to also have an impact and turn into something that could be commercialized would immediately get taken up because the students have it in their in their DNA to try and have entrepreneurship as a result of it. And the Weizmann has the experience that even though we're this very basic science research institute, throughout the years, there's a track record of how this, whenever it led to new fields and new understanding, it led to blockbuster drugs related to multiple sclerosis, or it gives you from cryptography the way how to make transactions on the internet that would be completely private. All of that is facilitated by things that came from Weizmann. So I think putting all these components together makes Weizmann a special place for this effort.
Avi, did you want to say anything?
Well, I mean, it's I fully agree. Maybe I just give another example. I mean, we are a small campus. We only have a graduate program, master and PhD. We don't have undergraduate. And we have about 280 scientists in total, about 4,000 people. Half of the scientists live on campus. It's like a kibbutz. And there is a big buzz of you meet people everywhere, in the cafeteria, that you mentioned in the Café Mada, Science Coffee.
280 is the group leaders. And
yeah, the group leaders.
1,000 scientists.
Yeah, right. Group leaders. We have students and so on. And so there is lots of interactions also between different fields. I mean, you heard the example of the computer guy with the biochemist. And there is another example I'd like to give of, I'm proud of it because it came from our department, the work of Avigdor Schertz. He's a guy who is studying photosynthesis. And eventually he got interested in cancer for some personal reasons. And he collaborated with the late Yoram Salomon, who was an expert in cancer. And he developed what's called the photodynamic therapy. So the idea is to isolate chlorophyll, to take it out of its normal environment in the plant cell where, chlorophyll is getting excited by the energy from the sun, by the photon, which starts a whole cascade. It splits water into H and O2, and the H goes with the CO2 and reduces the carbon. So all this is very, very, very controlled in the plant environment. If you take it out and you put it in the blood you inject it in the blood of a patient, if you shine light on the tumor, the free radical of oxygen don't have where to go and they burn everything in their area. And this method, which was quite science fiction at the time, has been approved in FDA and is used now for prostate cancer therapy. So this is an example also, I think, of a big impact caused by total academic freedom, by the willingness to go into completely crazy ideas, and by interdisciplinarity. So this is another thing. And the last thing I would say is come and visit. You'll understand it better.
well, just a sidebar to that, Avigdor Schertz, when I first met him, had co-opted a lab space within the solar tower and was using the lasers.
Right.
So Solar Tower was a functional research program with a huge mirror field. And he was co-opting their laser energy to do some of these experiments. And this was before his discoveries. So he was already thinking ahead. But again, a plant scientist who ends up treating cancer. So,
but if you want another good reason to come over to Weizmann, the daughter of Avigdor Schertz.
Yes, is now a staff.
She's also a professor at Weizmann, and I go swimming with her in Palmachim Beach, which is just pretty close to the Weizmann Institute, like a 15 minutes drive. And it's such a beautiful place to swim in. And actually, you could swim there, we're swimming there even in April or March, which I guess is a good time to get out of Toronto. So just a thought.
And Heather, do you have anything to contribute to that? Why Weizmann? You've been there. You're honoris causa PhD. In 2019, I think it was. Yes, or 18, and it was.
We have a number of projects going on with Weizmann in the physics area. The project I'm probably most excited about, Jerry and I together most excited about, is a project we are currently working on with the former president of Weizmann, Daniel, and that is the development of science centers for teenagers all over Israel. We have a number of science centers now. This big idea is actually being driven by Daniel, and these science centers are specially created buildings, and kids come to the science center one day a week. Kids who choose, young kids who are high school kids who are interested in science and may not have the opportunity in their own schools. They get the opportunity one day a week to come to the Science Center. It is purpose-built for science, for the exploration of ideas, and in very much the way that you are both describing. Whatever curiosity the student might have, there are a series of labs. The curriculum is partially developed by Weizmann scientists. We now have, I think, 6 of them dotted around Israel, including in underdeveloped communities. So that's just one of the things that is so exciting, the connection between the Weizmann and reaching outside it. But I did want to say one thing, Laurence, that also strikes me about our being here together, my being here together on this panel, and that is we all need to embrace addressing this climate problem. And there are a lot of people that I have heard say, look, this problem is so big that it's only going to get fixed when science fixes it. There'll be breakthroughs or entrepreneurial large-scale breakthrough like Elon Musk and the electric car. And so the rest of us living our everyday lives, we can't do anything. We have to wait for the giant breakthroughs to address the problem. And if I could say this legitimately, that the belief that I came to, and together with Laurie, who wrote the book with me, is that we all have a part to play. We individuals, and I'd be interested, what each of you feel about this. We individuals can do a lot on a day-to-day basis in how we live our lives, and we can do a lot by who we choose to elect. And we can do a lot by making our voices heard with other businesses by choosing either to shop with them or not shop with them, to give them our business or not give them our business. So how we live, where we spend our money, who we elect, every day we make all kinds of little decisions But those little decisions are cumulative. They're cumulative in an individual's life, and then one person and another person, and you get the big sort of breakthrough people like Greta, who inspire millions. But I think the story is we as individuals can do something. And if we can do our part, and then the science can have the breakthroughs, and the extraordinary entrepreneurs can leverage the science, then we have a chance at fighting this. But I certainly believe that.
Very well said. No.
And we just wait for the scientists. So I'd be so curious, Avi and Ron and Laurence, how do you feel about that?
Well, I can tell you this morning when we were flying in from Montreal, in a small plane, and the stewardess at the end came around to pick up all the garbage. And I looked at the plastic bag, the plastic cups, the paper, the bits and pieces, and I sort of had this moment knowing I was going to be here tonight thinking, oh no, I hope I didn't contribute to that. Because it's true. It's true. You have this sort of moment. Anyway.
I can give you a more... Please, Heather.
I was just going to quickly say, and that's the exciting transition. When your eyes open, we all could be little scientists. When our eyes are open and we see conscious of every plastic cup and every plastic wrapper and the clothes that we buy and throw out and the pizza boxes that are not actually recyclable, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, Ron, what were you going to say?
This joint effort that you were mentioning that is needed, it actually was very vivid to me that what is needed yesterday. So we had this event in Montreal, 5 to 7. And then in a pretty nice coincidence, when I knew that I was about to come here to this event that Susan organized, I was walking from the train station, which is just next to the campus of Weizmann, to my office and listening to music. And I was like, there was like very nice songs. So I was like really energized. And then I knew that like in the afternoon, I'm having this Zoom meeting in order to discuss this event. And something in my mind clicked unconsciously because the song I was energized with is a Bryan Adams song. And I said, hey, this is interesting. Bryan Adams is from Canada. And I'm checking on my phone. It turns out he has a concert in Montreal at the same time. And I got so worried because I didn't know what time the event is and whether it's overlapping with the concert. But it turns out that, everything works for the best. Yesterday, just after the event, we went together to the concert of Bryan Adams. And there, I could see the energy of what happens when people are working in concert or together. There was such fantastic energy there. And everybody, clapping together, working together. And I just had the sense that, like, if we could, channel that kind of energy into the challenges of sustainability, there's so much that could be achieved. So in terms of what you're saying of like how people should work together, I think, we've seen, the strength of working together so clearly yesterday.
So yeah, first I want to continue what Heather talked about, and science education is something huge, and the Schwarzheisman Institute also contributed a lot to physics education. Now we have thousands of people who take physics as major in high school, and this is quite unique, and it's good for the future of the country. And there is also the Davidson Institute that hosts about 400,000 students from schools and high school everywhere and teach the students and the teachers science. So this creates a huge impact. It's a long-term investment. There is a new generation, and the new generation will be mostly the one which will pay the price for this change in climate. So they have to know, they have to be educated, and they receive education now also in sustainability. Now, Heather said that everyone has something to do, and this is true. This is very, it's different from quantum physics, there only physicists do physics. Here, everyone has to play a role to play. And I was also stricken by that when I got one of the responsibility I got recently was to become in charge of the Green Campus initiative in Weizmann. So we're trying to turn the institute to reduce the carbon footprint, to maintain, oh, you have a squirrel there.
He's interested in science.
It's a biodiversity, so...
That squirrel has been genetically engineered to understand everything we've said. And he remembers it all.
And one of the things I'm doing, I worked with everybody on campus, you know, people who are in charge of construction, in charge of the energy, in charge of the gardening, in charge of the waste. And it's really a pleasure to work with these people, and everyone wants to do something, and they feel really, you know, they feel much more important for the institution, and they really want to work. So I think we have to go to this goodwill of people to harness it, and I think people feel much better. I mean, one aspect we didn't touch is mental health, which is affected today by the feeling of, you know, that you are powerless in front of such event. And there is a phenomena which is now well established of depression because of this. And the cure to that is really to act, to do something.
Yeah.
And this, I fully agree that everything from the small steps to the big steps to the discovery, everything work together. I heard a talk from Al Gore who was telling that, you know, it's important to create this nice ecology where you have ideas, you have investors, you have finance for the climate tech or environment tech. So you have the investors, and so you can create a new industry. I mean, I think we have many components now which come together, and this is what we have to make sure that is working to make an impact.
And Weizmann has already done it many times over, which is, I think, the key message here in many ways, that go with the people who know what they're doing. And I think that there's a real opportunity here, real opportunity. Anyway, we have time for some questions. I can't really, is that anyone in the audience? Art?
Thanks for the great discussion. I have a question actually, I guess related to what Heather suggested, which is that we should all be doing more, which I think all of us would agree with. But it seems to me the important thing is, what are the important things we can do, not the feel-good things. So my understanding of recycling, for example, of many things, not terribly effective unless it's metals. That, you know, some things are effective. What we have to do is cut down air travel, maybe get out of gas-powered cars, change our diets to more, you know, non-meat-based. I'm a carnivore, so it's easy for me to say, but it's, you know, non-meat-based. So what are the top things we can do? Not just the feel-good things, because that's not going to have an impact. What are the things that can really make a difference?
Who would like to answer that?
Sure. So I think you named some of those, you know, the biggest impacts that we have. So, you know, it relates to really the kind of travel that we choose to do. It relates to the food that we're eating. It relates to our homes and how we, you know, cool them, heat them, how big they are, these things. I want to also add, though, the perspective, let's say, about recycling. It's true that for many things, in terms of the total impact, it might be much, much smaller. At the same time, I think it also serves some other roles. And I think that relates to this issue of the psychological challenge that we're facing. So I think there's another role in your behavior, and that is to keep your resilience, optimism, sense of, you know, you're trying to do something about it. And then I think that, like, recycling is an example that even if it doesn't have a huge impact, even for the small impact, it has a very big psychological impact. And I think we need that as well in order to keep feeling involved in this. And even people that could not change the mode of transportation, they're part of the effort. And by that also sending messages to the politicians, to industry, to other things. So there's something that I think for us as scientists, it's kind of counterintuitive because, you know, we're very, rigorous about it and rational about it. And if it has a small effect, then maybe it shouldn't be done. But I think in sustainability, very often, unlike quantum mechanics, there's like many other aspects you should look at. And it's a dynamical system, what happens in society in general. And there, I think also recycling plays a part.
I mean, you probably remember the days when we used to separate out cans from newspapers, from this and that. We had like 17 different boxes. And then all of a sudden, everything went into the same box, and there was a suspicion that it really didn't matter. But I think it does, because I think the act of doing that and thinking about it changes the way you actually do things. And I think we're all doing that now. If you think about what you do now versus what you did 5, 10 years ago, it's different. Little things make a difference. I think Heather's book highlights that. Do you want to comment on that?
I think
well, I was just going to say that, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that we think that the little things don't add up, but they do. We produce in the world 300 million tons of disposable plastic every single year. Plastic that ends up, as we all know, either in these incredible dumpsters where they emit bad gases or in the bottom of the ocean. So it matters if we make the decisions to not use plastic, to not use plastic wrap, plastic containers, plastic wherever we can. We actually can make a difference. If enough people individually just stop or cut back their use of plastic. And I'm not sure who it was who asked the question, but I think your point about meat is huge. If we just gave up meat 2 days a week, we'd have a massive impact collectively on the planet. To say nothing of how wonderful it would be to give up meat 7 days a week. But even if we just produced meat 2 days a week, we'd have a huge impact on the planet. So I found in my own exploration, I was quite inspired by how the little changes in a series of everyday actions over the course of a year, you can have a real impact. And if you're running a family, you can have an even bigger impact. And if you just, your point, Ron, about, or Avi, about how it makes you feel, you sort of become this eco-warrior internally. And it feels good. It really does feel good. And then the more you're in it, the more interested you become, the more your action changes. So I of course, respect that the big breakthroughs are so essential. But I really have become an advocate for understanding there's about 7 areas of our day-to-day life that if we made some changes, could have a lot of impact. And it feels good. Not just for feeling good, but it feels good to have impact.
The question.
So I'm an advocate.
Pardon me? Oh. Well, let's ask the question.
No, take question.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm appalled by the use of plastic. I can't describe the rage and anger I feel every time I go somewhere. People are literally buying crates of disposable plastic bottles. And why is this really not changing? And how do we get, and it's been talked about for years and years and years, the use of plastic. And I see everybody, if you go to Costco, everybody's filling up their car with crates of plastic bottles. And it's, in this event, there are no plastic bottles, but I can go to a conference next door and they're giving everybody plastic bottles. And I really don't know why we legislate against, well, we don't legislate, but we try to do something about labels on cigarettes and labels on this and that. And why do we keep talking about plastic and nothing's changed?
Do you guys want to comment on that?
So I don't, one thing I can tell you, recently I was watching, there's a Netflix series, and they have a chapter about how come we started using mineral water so much. I think it's called History 101. So it's very interesting. So I think, and that relates to the decision, how come instead of getting tap water, I think they said it cost you like 50 cents a year, instead the water consumed, they gave the example of the US, would cost you $900 or $1,000-something a year instead of 50 cents. But going back to plastic, maybe just to mention, in my lab, there's now, so I told you we were able to achieve these bacteria that now change their diet into take carbon dioxide and producing, useful things. So I have a student that came from from our master program in France. And she had the vision to basically create biodegradable plastic that degrades quickly in the environment in our bacteria directly from carbon dioxide. And we have some of it already in my lab that has been created. She wants to make the first, something out of it. And that's not a solution to the problem of single use, because we really should minimize single use as much as possible in general. But just to say, we're trying to think of also innovative moves forward, also in terms of materials, how quickly do they degrade or get to the environment, and how are they produced. So that could be, the most ecological plastic ever. So if you're at Weizmann, hop over, we'll show you.
Avi?
So, yeah, I think the answer to your question relates to what Heather says, that everybody is involved. It should be you guys as voters and us and the politicians which make rules. So we need this activism. We are eco-warriors. We are all involved in it for many years, but I think all of us must do that. And then things will change. And the other thing is that plastic is very convenient material for many things. The bottles don't break, it's not like glass and so on. So making biodegradable is one idea. I just want to add that Chaim Weizmann, who was the founder of Weizmann, he was one of the father of biotechnology. He did the fermentation with ethanol, butanol, acetone fermentation, which makes fuels, or, it's one way to make fuel. But one of his ideas when he started, and that's how our department started actually, was to use oil from castor bean to make nylon and plastic. And he did it. But, there are many things which have been done, and it's so cheap to do it from petrol that the economy speaks. So this is things which are really related to the policies and taxation and
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. This program was the brainchild of one of the former presidents of the Weizmann Institute, Ostrovsky.
Yeah.
And he was the one that convinced the Canadians, because he figured that they could be convinced and no one else wanted to listen. Remember, this is the 1980s, the oil industry was prominent. And his point was that Israel had no oil. It was, as Paris says, there's the oily countries and then there's the non-oily countries. And Israel's a non-oily country. Now it's a gas...
holy country and the oily country.
Holy and oily. And we're holy and they're oily. And Ostrovsky had the idea of pushing forward with a solar program. And you've got to remember that this was not something that anyone even contemplated as being economically successful. Sure, research, but whatever. And it has been. We know that. I don't pay electricity. I have solar panels on my roof. I get a credit every month from Toronto Hydro. I was shocked that when I thought, wow, this is fantastic. But my point is that this was where the genesis was, and now we are here expanding this through multiple different components, as Ron has explained: food, biodiversity, pollution, climate, marine biology, etc. So I think you can see how one little focus explodes over time. It's taken a long time, but good things take a long time. So thank you. Is there any other questions? Yes, one last question.
You were talking about all the different kinds of wheat, including our wonderful Canadian wheat. And yet, my understanding that people hate genetically modified products. And I wonder how you can explain how all these genetic modified products don't cause people to get really annoyed.
Okay. So first of all the crops that we eat are genetically modified, right? Because that's the mutation, it's not the natural wheat. Wheat in nature doesn't have, has to disseminate its seeds. So you don't have the spike in one piece. It's fragile, it breaks apart. So these mutations were the first when human domesticated plants. And then there were many mutations. In Canada, for example, why can you grow it in Canada? It's not from Canada. And this is due to all the selection and mutation and genetic changes which happen in the wheat, that the change to response to the daylight, the resistance to the cold, and so on and so forth. So also the growth cycle is very short. You know, I saw in Saskatoon they plant it when the soil is melting in May, and they harvest it before the winter in August. So it's completely unnatural. And if you have the idea that classical agriculture is natural, so it's wrong. Now, the GM, genetically modification, you know, I think actually, again, I'll quote the Canadian, they have the best legislation, I think, in my view, for that. They do a case-by-case analysis. Some changes really, you know, if I put a gene of resistance from a wild wheat into a modern wheat, resistant to a disease, and this enables not to spray with fungicides and to have a resistant crop, you know, it's things mutations which can happen naturally. And this is one of the criteria that is used in the legislation. If you do something completely strange, you know, between very distant species and which could be dangerous to humans, so you don't do that, of course. So it has to be a legislation which is case by case, and I think the Canadian legislation actually is the best that I know in the world for this GM.
Anyway, I think our time is up, unfortunately, but there will be a chance to chat a bit afterwards. And I want to thank everybody for attending, for listening so attentively, and I want to thank our panelists for doing such a great job. It was a wonderful discussion, and thank you, Heather, for taking time to join us today. It was wonderful having you. And next time, next time in person, we hope. And so now I'm going to turn it back to Susan for some closing remarks.
Thank you. Heather, can you see me? Awesome. So I'm not sure if you heard at the beginning, Heather, that I said tonight was a dream come true for me. We couldn't see you, but I didn't know if you could hear. So now you understand what I mean. To have a couple of rock stars and to have Heather and to, you know, knowledge is power. And I feel, if I had to sum up one word, I feel that tonight's conversation empowered us. I feel that we have what we need to move forward, that every one of us can make a difference. And Heather gave away the surprise. You're all going home with a signed copy of Heather's book, so thank you for that, Heather. And I also mentioned in my introduction that Heather is an inspiring role model to me and so many others, so this is a special evening for me. So, you know, I think that we can sum up tonight with empowered. We have scientists who are on the case, and we can help empower them. We have things that we can do each and every day that will make a difference, and it feels good. So, you know, just to end off, as you heard, the campus is characterized by the joy and pursuit of science and the multidisciplinary approach. You heard the openness, sharing knowledge, and, you know, that really enables scientists to be curious and offer the freedom for boundless creativity. And the model also includes global collaboration, including the many collaborations that we mentioned earlier. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank our leadership who is here today in great numbers. So our national board, our Toronto chapter, our Weizmann League, and you know, it's really very gratifying for me to have the leadership here in such great numbers. We also have a special guest, the chair of the international board is here with us, so thank you, Kathy. And I also want to introduce you to the amazing Weizmann Canada team. So the lights are blinding me, so I can't see you, but please wave. So Claire Howard, Sarah Marcotte, Diane Bégin, John Reed, Griselda Lagakos, Anna Kotsouforas, who is responsible for this venue right across the country, Jonathan Namiak, and Justin Burns. So thank you. You know, they say the word success needs the you, so we're able to do all of this because of you. So if you want to learn more about the sustainability initiative or anything about Weizmann, we love to talk about Weizmann, so just flag any one of us down. And don't forget your signed copy. And for those social media people, please follow us on social media and stick around, have an opportunity to chat. They are not rushing off to a concert this evening. And Heather, big hug, and thank you so much. And hug to Jerry as well. Thank you for everything you do for humanity, for Weizmann, and look forward to seeing you soon. So the biggest thank you goes to each and every one of you for choosing to spend the last couple of hours with us. So thank you so much. Have a good night.